The next question comes from Frank Mealy and goes to Mr. Roots.
Mr. Roots, our nation's libertarian streak would seem to argue against any kind of government interference in personal choices that don't have a moral dimension. However, morality has played a significant role in legislation in the past 2 centuries. Today's political climate seems to be saying that society has no overarching moral interest in such matters as drug use, abortion, marriage, but it does have a moral interest in health care, education, and the minimum wage. Do you believe that state or federal majorities should have a right to legislate on any issues that control other people's behavior, and specifically how?
I do not. I do not believe that government should be involved in any of those areas you mentioned. All of those areas would improve. Our health would improve. Everything about human life would improve. Remember when the Berlin Wall came down? Listen, it was more polluted. The government supremacists claim that you need government to, government's better for the environment. All evidence shows otherwise. In Korea, the average South Korean is actually taller. Did you know that? The average South Korean, after 50 years of that split, and remember they were the same exact society just 50 years ago, the average South Korean is taller than the average North Korean. Their stature, their nutrition is better than the North Koreans. Every time you unleash central planning and socialism on a human problem, you get more problems. Every time you unleash the power of the individual human spirit, you heal, you cure problems. And if we just had the courage to do nothing about so many of these things, we have to have the courage to do nothing. I know it sounds unusual, but if we had the courage to do nothing, you would see the human predicament in this world flower and blossom with abundance and prosperity. We would reach the stars. Instead, these 2 government supremacist parties keep taking us down the road towards slave plantation ideology and government control.
Senator Walsh, your answer?
You know, this is an area where Congressman Daines and I disagree. Congressman Daines believes in overturning Roe v. Wade, which would allow the government to get involved in the decisions regarding a woman's health care. I do not believe that the government should be involved in a woman's health care decision. I do not believe the government should be involved in our bedrooms. I do not believe the government should be putting mandates on individuals here in Montana. So I think that we need to take a step back and keep the government out of our individual lives. You know, one of the first bills that I introduced when I went back to Washington, D.C. was the Civil Liberties Protection Act, because the government has the ability right now to obtain phone data on everybody in this room. So what my bill will do will require the government to get a warrant through the FISA courts to obtain this information. You know, Congressman Daines signed on to legislation just last week that would allow companies to share our data with the government. I think that's wrong.
Congressman Daines?
So it's another important question about, are we going to stand when you're leading and serving back in Washington with Barack Obama and the federal government, or are you going to stand with the people of Montana? These kinds of decisions need to be left to the states. We should not have the federal government overturning what Montanans might decide on these important issues. So I'm going to stand with Montana. I'm going to respect what Montanans choose on this. We don't want the federal government overturning what Montanans have already decided we believe is right to do in our state. It's so important that we allow the states to have primacy in so many areas in this country, whether in some of these issues we just were described or also in regulations. We don't need to have this overarching, overbearing, overreaching federal government intruding on our way of life out here in Montana.
Mr. Roots, your response?
I'd like to discuss an area that libertarians sometimes disagree with each other on, and that is abortion. It's one of those areas where occasionally you will find libertarians, even at the Libertarian National Convention, who will take a pro-life position, and they will say, well, they do that because abortion is murder, and therefore it's not really any different than enforcing laws against murder. My response to that is this. Whenever you ask a politician who claims he's pro-life and who claims he believes abortion is murder, whenever you ask him, well, what should the penalty be for having an abortion? You know what their response is? They'd do anything not to answer the question. If they say anything other than life imprisonment or the death penalty, they don't really believe abortion is murder. Okay? Because if abortion is murder, it would have to be first-degree murder. We all agree on that. It's premeditated. So if they say anything other, I constantly am in arguments with some good friends of mine on this issue. Most of my friends disagree with me on this. They call themselves pro-life, and they say that they believe abortion is murder. Again, if you say anything other than
Mr.
the death
Roots,
penalty
your
or
time
life
is up.
imprisonment, you don't really believe that.
Senator Walsh, your response?
You know, Congressman Daines, again, talks about shifting the burden from the federal government to the state government. I don't believe that the state government should be involved in making women's health care decisions. I don't believe the state government should be involved in making decisions what happens in mine and my wife's bedroom. So the state government shouldn't be putting mandates out on the citizens of Montana either.
Congressman Daines, your response?
Yeah, one of the it's very important as we look at these issues that we stand to protect the most vulnerable in our society. And the most vulnerable include the disabled, they include the elderly, they also include the unborn. And so I will continue to fight for fundamental rights, the Declaration of Independence. In fact, they call them unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
The